Let's bring in NBC's national correspondent, political correspondent, Steve Kornacki at the big board. Steve, take us inside this new NBC News poll.
Yeah, some interesting ingredients that go into what you're seeing here. Harris with a 5-point advantage in our poll nationally over Donald Trump. The big picture, of course, is, look, we've been polling the 2024 race for a while now. This is the first one that NBC has polled with a Harris-Trump matchup. All of the previous polls we did were Biden versus Trump. And going back a year, all of those Biden-Trump polls, 4 of them Trump had the lead in. 1 of them was tied. So big picture here. This is an illustration of how much the race has sort of transformed over the last 2 months. Now, take a look in terms of what goes into that advantage for Harris in this poll. 1, a gender gap. You're seeing here among men, Trump with an advantage. That's a 12-point advantage for Trump. Among women, 58-37. That is a 21-point advantage for Kamala Harris. What that adds up to is 21 and 12, a total gender gap of 33 points. Now, if anything like that materializes on Election Day, it would just blow away 2020 and 2016, which also had massive gender gaps. This would be significantly bigger than that. That margin among women for Kamala Harris, particularly younger women, an important part of that for her, helping power her in that lead that you see. Then we break it down by race here. Among white voters, 9-point advantage for Trump. I think this one is significant. Among black voters in our poll, 85-7 Harris. Remember, a lot of talk when Joe Biden was the candidate because there were a lot of numbers showing that with Biden as the candidate, Trump was somewhere in the teens among black voters. That doesn't sound like much, but historically, that would be very high for a Republican. And Biden's number among black voters when he was the candidate, you were generally seeing somewhere in the 60s. Even there were some polls in the 50s. It was a big area of slack for Biden when he was the candidate because this is traditionally a very core Democratic group. In our poll, at least, you see what would be a more sort of traditional number there for the Democrats and for the Republicans. And among Latino voters, Harris with a 19-point advantage. Again, that would be lower for Democrats than they typically get among Latino voters. But again, it is an improvement from where Joe Biden was running. So that helps add up to that lead that you see there for Kamala Harris. Also, take a look at this. The image of Kamala Harris since she became the candidate. This is just asking folks, do you have a positive or negative view? And you can see Harris, 48%. A couple things stand out. She's the only one above water. It's slightly, but higher positive than negative. Everyone, you see this, I should say, Walz is as well here. But Harris, the highest number there at 48% above water. You see Trump at 53. The key, though, is when Harris got in this race just before, we asked the same question about her. Her positive score, this was back in July in our poll, was just 32%. So it's gone from 32 to 48 since she became a candidate. You know, Trump's number more flat. We're kind of used to seeing that for him. So a big jump there for her. Then there is this one. And if you're a Republican and you're looking to take heart in something in this poll, this would be it here. Asking about a number of issues and attributes. The question asked here is, which candidate would be better on? And you can see, look, on securing the border, immigration, this rates as a very high concern, voters say in our poll. It's a 21-point advantage for Trump over Harris. Dealing with the economy and inflation, if you combine them, the top issue for voters in our poll. Trump with a 9-point advantage there. You see some Harris advantages here. I just flagged this one because this was, remember, necessary mental and physical health to be president. This is where Trump had that massive advantage over Joe Biden. This was basically reading as a question about age when Biden was the candidate. And that has just completely turned around with Harris as the Democratic candidate. And the other key to this, too, I think just one thing to keep in mind, while these are Trump advantages here, and if these advantages do persist for him, it certainly keeps him in the game heading into the election. He had bigger advantages on these questions when Biden was the candidate. On the border and on immigration, when Biden was the candidate, it was a 35-point edge for Trump. It's 21 now. Look, the economy when Biden was the candidate, 22. It's 9 now. So, again, you're seeing the progress that Harris has made from where Biden was on a lot of these questions and with a lot of these groups. She is sort of, we say there was slack in the Democratic coalition. There were other issues, too. You could see that, sort of repairing that is why she is ahead in our poll right now. Although, again, as I say, the fact that Trump still has these advantages on the border and on the economy certainly do keep him in the game.
You know, Steve, it's interesting. I mean, you look at the question about the health, the necessary mental and physical health, a 49-point shift there. I want to bring up another issue, though. I laughed when I saw it because for some reason I don't know why people who take polls before elections undervalue certain issues that end up having a huge impact and overvalue others. I will tell you, as you know better than me, the border has always like in 2018, Republicans ran on it. 2020, they ran on it. 2022, they ran on it. They demagogued it. Looked like a huge issue. Ended up not being that big of an issue. But abortion in 2022, before the election, and polls just like this, like 5-6% of people said abortion was the most important issue. And then the exit polls started showing up in 22, and you saw that it was a third of voters who actually saw that. In this poll, I think that you have the same thing where only 6% of respondents said that abortion was the top issue. And yet we just know the history of elections since Dobbs, that it's going to play a much bigger impact than that. I'm curious, do you have any theories on why people undervalue that issue before the election and then on election day in 22, 23, it jumps so much?
Yeah, there's a couple ways of thinking about it. I mean, my sort of take on it is if you think about the special elections that we've had since the Dobbs decision in 2022, you know, a special election for Congress, that sort of thing. Remember, there was a big one on Long Island earlier this year, Tom Suozzi, the Democrat, winning. I think it's pretty clear to me that abortion has been a major factor in the Democrats doing consistently very well in these special elections. And a big reason for that is in the special elections, the overall turnout tends to be lower, obviously much lower than it is like in a presidential election. And so abortion becomes a big motivating factor that I think disproportionately gets Democratic voters out to the polls in these special elections. And I think it's a big reason why the Democrats have had success in the special elections. The question it raises, though, is obviously when you get to a presidential election, now you're talking, I don't know, 140, 150, maybe 160 million people voting in a presidential election. Does it have that same sort of disproportionate effect when just you have such a maximum, you know, such a huge pool of voters? And the other cautionary note I always just say about abortion, because I'm still sort of processing, I think, the politics of this too myself. But one thing that is in my mind, at least a little bit in 2022, I think of Georgia a lot. If you remember Georgia in 2022, Brian Kemp, the Republican governor, got reelected by 8 points. Herschel Walker, Trump's sort of handpicked candidate for the U.S. Senate in Georgia, was defeated as they both ran on the same ballot, two Republicans, different results. And it does stick out in my mind that, you know, in the post-Dobbs world, it's the governor who has more power on this question of abortion than the U.S. Senator. It's the states who are setting the laws right now. And Kemp and Walker had identical positions on abortion, and yet Kemp was able to win in Georgia while Walker actually was defeated in the Senate election. So I've always sort of had that one in my mind, too, that there was something else splitting those candidates. I actually thought in 2022 in Georgia it was much more of a Trump effect in the suburbs. But look, we're still seeing it. This is about 2 years now. The exact effects of this Dobbs decision, how they reshuffle things, do they motivate one particular group, young women maybe, still sort of sorting it out. But it's a major, major variable, obviously, heading into this one.
Yeah. Definitely is.
NBC's Steve Kornacki, thank you. And I think it's more than young women, honestly, because if you have a daughter of childbearing age, or if you are a man who, we're all worried about this.
Well, and
from
you know,
one angle or another.
I saw a focus group earlier this year where a libertarian said, well, wait a second. If I don't trust the federal government to handle my money, my health care, all these other things, why do I trust the federal government to handle and control a woman's body?
To save my daughter's life.
As libertarians said, which means it will soon be my body and men's body. So it is, again, it's a concern for a lot of people.
Harris up in the polls. Now, remember, a national poll does not reflect what will happen in the election. But it does show us something. The national election will ultimately be decided by the states in the Electoral College system. That's why, like Hillary Clinton, you could be up in the national poll and still lose. But here's what I'm going to show you. The new NBC poll does have Harris up 5, far better than Biden's position a few months back, and it's driving headlines and buzz for Harris in politics, certainly online. The spread is still within the margin of error. And in the states that matter, as we showed you last week, things are largely a statistical tie. But what national polls can help reveal is big shifts in sentiment, especially when it's current. So instead of asking just how people might vote in the future in 5 or 6 weeks if they vote early, you can measure how the nation feels right now. And that's where there's really good news for Harris. There is a huge, unusually large jump in favorable views of Harris since she became the nominee. So the poll is asking, how do you feel today? And a lot more people today are feeling good about her. In fact, it's the largest such increase in decades, as Kornacki and Welker reported on the new Meet the Press.
This is the largest increase that we have seen for any politician since George W. Bush in the wake of the September 11th attacks on this issue.
Absolutely, Kristen. I mean, we were seeing numbers like this for years for Kamala Harris. Now you're seeing a very different story.
Many more Americans right now have a more favorable view of Harris. And pollsters note how remarkable a shift that is, going back to the surge in approval for President Bush and the historic demonstration of unity after the 9/11 attack. That's when Bush's favorability surged, partly because people felt favorably towards him and his response, and partly because of a longer and documented rally around the flag effect. So historians and pollsters note it is rare for the public to suddenly just like a prominent politician way more than they used to, because they already know that person and views tend to be more baked in. The 2001 example reflects that external event and response. With all that in mind and what Kornacki just said there, here are Harris's numbers. She had a 32% favorability in July, which roughly reflects the sloping blue curve that you see of where she'd been. And that was her role of VP. 1 out of 3 is not a great benchmark for winning a national election, if 32% or so is 1 out of 3 people thinking of you favorably. But then you have this jump. Look at that huge jump to 48%. And that is about 50% higher than that prior number, or a raw 16-point surge, one of the largest shifts in decades for any politician. So that's the big news tonight. The Harris campaign is happy about it, while still cautioning people nothing is set yet. But why is Harris rising in ways we have not seen in decades? In my report right now for you, I'm going to show why the answer actually has some layers and why it may explain the race that we're in right now, the current state of the race, and even where we're headed. So first, within the Democratic Party, there was a shockwave, swapping out a president with fading numbers for the new VP. And the party managed to do so, and I know you know this because you follow the news. They did so without any big primary or long jockeying public process. And that has clearly energized and united both the party, Democrats, and anti-Trump forces who might not be Democrats, independents, or moderates, who were not sold on Trump or opposed Trump, but were also concerned about Biden. The numbers show an embrace for Harris as that new alternative. And then, I said layers, the second layer may be how people are viewing Harris now in a new role. And here's what we can tell you. The people like her in this role. Being the nominee and the party leader taking on Donald Trump is different from being a deferential, deliberately smaller, quieter role of understudy or vice president to the president. And by playing that role well, many experts say Harris had to dim her shine. And that's literally the term that some historians and strategists use, citing an ancient precept that in political struggles, you never outshine the master. Always make those above you feel completely superior. In your desire to please and impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite, inspiring fear and insecurity in them. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power. And that's not just a tip. I am quoting from the #1 law, the very first law in the 48 Laws of Power, a best-selling history and strategy book by Robert Greene, who we actually cited and hosted on this program before. The lesson applies to anyone biding time for higher office, certainly a vice president, but it dates back centuries. There are ancient strategy teachings from Machiavelli to Galileo, and how they carefully paid tribute to superiors or financial backers in the Medici family, always making their accomplishments subservient to whoever was more powerful. Here's the author discussing the lesson along with 50 Cent, who later co-authored a book with Green and applied it to entertainment, where you know competition is fierce and how you cannot outshine your sponsor.
Law number one was always like the most important one to me. Never outshine the master.
You know the laws of power. You never outshine the master. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? Like I even had a conversation and said it to Drake. Mm-hmm. I said, don't ever go over or be past Wayne in conversation, because it'll hurt you. Because then if you got somebody that's actually over you in your chain of command, you always like that.
Chain of command. Understand it, or you may not survive it. That's 50, that's Green, other political writers. They're not saying they invented these power laws, rather that they've studied and applied them. And if it all sounds familiar, it is a tale and fable as old as time.
When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
I took away your fear, and I showed you a path. You are my greatest student.
Always two there are. No more, no less. A master and an apprentice.
If you are the apprentice, you have to know how to be a good apprentice and not think you're jumping ahead to becoming the master. Now, today, we see Harris as the boss, in the prime position. She's a dominant figure in the Democratic Party. She started this week by seizing control, challenging Trump to a debate that he's running from, making him respond to her and her perceived win at the last debate. And that is the Harris in the role that we are seeing many more Americans now like. Quite literally, they're responding positively to her in this role as the boss in charge, which is a shift from her past vice presidential role. And it's a shift people are noticing.
Please welcome Kamala Harris. Everybody is saying it. You all have said it. I know you have. It seems to us that something happened to you the moment President Biden, stepped aside and withdrew his candidacy, that a veil or something dropped and you just stepped into your power.
If somebody breaks in my house, they're getting shot.
Yes, I hear that. I hear that.
Probably should not have said that.
But
my staff will deal with that later.
Yeah.
I'm just smiling from ear to ear, Oprah. I have never felt this much joy and optimism in a campaign in a long time.
When your adversaries will try and turn your strength into a weakness, don't you let them. Don't you let them. I find joy in the American people. I find joy and optimism.
Here at the Democratic National Convention, the energy is all about joy, change, joy, and some sweet dance moves.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
As the saying goes, if you've got something to say, say it to my face.
Harris is the boss. She's in the spotlight, which she earned by knowing when to stay out of it and defer, given the important but secondary role that she took as a dutiful VP. For our report tonight, it's also worth seeing the evidence of how different it was when she was in that other role, Vice President to Biden, applying that power law and supporting the administration in that more conventional role.
Just today, President Biden announced record job growth.
From the beginning, the president has been very direct and clear about our perspective.
And I can think of no one more committed to achieving our collective goals than President Joe Biden.
President Biden set an ambitious goal. Today's numbers reflect the point that President Biden has made many times. America's economy is strong.
And what's the message to Iran?
Don't.
As President Biden said, just don't.
Exactly. One word. Pretty straightforward.
You can almost see and hear the difference, and that is what the law would teach, because that was the role she was in. Just as if you are a lawyer advocating a case, it's different than if you get appointed to become a judge. Anyone can relate to this at a certain level when you have a role or a job. It could be parent or soccer coach. It could be vice president of your company or CEO of your company. Harris maintained that stance even and especially when it was difficult. Consider those moments after Biden's debate performance, which we now know led to the shift in her rise. In those first hours that night after the debate, Harris did not waver at all. She stepped into the heat for interviews, including one on this network that night. She was talking to our colleague Rachel. And she was as loyal as ever, as the role demands. And if others were already discussing the perhaps remote, perhaps looming possibility of her becoming the replacement, becoming the master rather than the apprentice, she did not engage in any of that, not one iota that night or in the weeks ahead, let alone try to outshine the president. And a contrast that we live through right now. The former President Trump and his vice president, who couldn't even keep it together through the duration of their term, which ended with a failed illegal insurrection and coup. So say nothing of the larger point that, of course, Mike Pence doesn't support Donald Trump right now. She followed the law of power, and now she is surging with more power than anyone else in the party, including, in the political sense, the president who she dutifully served until she came into this view. And most striking of all, the American public is warming and welcoming her in this role.
I know that when you were in this position, and 5 points nationally ain't nothing, you are desperate for your allies to continue to communicate that you are the underdog, that it is, what was the old expression? I think Dan Rather used to call it tight as a tick, that there is no space for complacency. That said, the polls have to be a very encouraging sign inside the Harris campaign.
Well, the national poll, this particular one, is encouraging, certainly. I especially like the progress she's made on some pretty important issues to most voters, namely the economy, and how her favorability has ticked up. And I also like the enthusiasm that's recorded on her side of the equation. But having said that, national polls don't matter. Battleground state polls matter, and there's 7 of them. And just today, the same people that did this national poll pointed out that Trump is in a much better position in Arizona than she is, that Trump appears to be in a somewhat better position in Georgia than she is, that North Carolina is essentially tied. So we've got, and if you look at all of battleground states, if you add in Nevada and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, these are all margin of error races. We got 6 weeks. This is no time to go, oh, woof, we got this done. This is a time where the candidate and the campaign is desperately wanting people to stay engaged, enthusiastic, calling their friends in other states that are battleground states, doing whatever they can to help, volunteering, and making sure that those registered voters become likely voters on Harris's side of the equation.
Well, and Claire, that the likely voters are become Harris voters, right? It's both. It's both. It's turning out the low propensity voters to turn them into voters, and that's usually a lot of young voters, right, who may have gone off to college since they were paying attention over the summer, making sure they're registered where they're going to be in November, and then doing that final bit of persuasion. I want to show you, Claire, how our friend and colleague Steph Ruhle made an argument very effectively with someone who describes himself as undecided.
It's not too much to ask Kamala, say, are you for a Palestinian state if Hamas is going to run that state?
Okay.
Yes or no?
And let's say you don't like her answer. Are you going to vote for Donald Trump?
No, I'm not.
Kamala
I just said I'm not going to vote for her.
Harris is not running for perfect. She's running against Trump. We have 2 choices. And so there are some things you might not know her answer to. And in 2024, unlike 2016 for a lot of the American people, we know exactly what Trump will do, who he is, and the kind of threat he is to democracy.
I don't know.
So it's unclear to me how there could be an informed...
The problem that a lot of people have with Kamala is we don't know her answer to anything, okay?
But you know
and
his answer to everything.
And that's why I would never vote for him, and people shouldn't vote for him. But people also are expected to have some idea of what the program is of the person you're supposed to vote for. You're just not supposed to say, well, you have to vote for Y because X is this, that, and the other. Let's find out a little bit more. And I don't think it's a lot to ask her to sit down for a real interview as opposed to a puff piece in which she describes like her feelings of growing up in Oakland with nice lawns.
Then I would just say to that, when you move to Nirvana, give me your real estate broker's number and I'll be your next door neighbor. We don't live there.
You know, Claire, at some point, Dick Cheney knows enough about what Kamala Harris's policies are, and I know him pretty well. He cares a lot about national security policy. Liz Cheney cares an awful lot about national security policy. She knows enough about what Kamala Harris's policies are. So do Adam Kinzinger and Jeff Duncan, and lifelong Republican and McCain ally Mayor Giles of Arizona. I mean, this to me doesn't feel like it's about what people like that say it's about.
Yeah, listen, I think Kamala Harris has been in public life for a long time. Kamala Harris has set out her positions on some very important issues like housing and affordability issues and food and groceries. She certainly has stated her policies on how important the climate change issue is. And by the way, she has been very clear about what her position is in reproductive health freedom, whereas does Bret Stephens, does that guy know what Trump is going to do on that issue? He changes every 10 minutes on what he's saying about how he will treat women's essential freedom in terms of controlling her own body. And that's the other thing. It just drives me crazy, these Republicans saying, well, it's his policies. He can't put 3 sentences together about his policies. He gets a question about manufacturing in Michigan, and he goes on 10 minutes about countries that have a nuclear weapon. It's like, what? I mean, he isn't cogent about his policies, and I'm not sure these people even know what his policies are. All I know about his foreign policy is he loves dictators. That's all I know.
Well, and David Jolly, Bret Stephens cares a lot about foreign policy. There's not a single person who saw Donald Trump in the sit room who's voting for him again. There's not a single person who saw Donald Trump in the tank briefings where the Pentagon briefed him on operations and crises who's voting for him again. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, gave a fiery speech saying that in America we don't swear an oath to a king or a dictator. We pledge an oath to the Constitution. There is not one person who saw him up close in a military or national. General Kelly, who was his chief of staff, said that he's the, quote, most damaged person he's ever seen in his life. Rex Tillerson, who was his Secretary of State, called him a moron. Bob Corker, Senate former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, said that the West Wing resembled adult daycare. You find me anyone who thinks that Donald Trump is a good bet on anything related to U.S. national security, and I'll send you a box of donuts.
Nicole, say that all again. So louder, please. That's exactly, I think, the point that Stephanie Ruhle was trying to make in her exchange there, which is we now know Donald Trump's view of the world, his view of the country. We know his leadership. And for many people, they see him as a danger to constitutional order, constitutional norms, and to, frankly, the order on the world stage. And look, I think I didn't see the entire segment. So if Bret was being critical of Vice President Harris unduly, then he should be criticized. But I do think this is also an area where sometimes it's easy to hold Vice President Harris to a standard of perfection that she can't meet. She's not a perfect candidate. She came into this race 45 days ago. Some of her positions have changed, and there are questions that she hasn't answered. But what we know is the value set she brings to the office, both for domestic policy and her view of the international order, her willingness to protect the constitutional norms, her willingness to protect personal freedoms, her willingness to fight for an opportunity economy for all people. We know her record with the Biden administration, helping lead a post-pandemic recovery that's the envy of the world. We know that the Biden-Harris administration has restored respect for the country on the world stage. Are there questions she hasn't answered? Of course. Of course there are. But to hold her to a standard of perfection, we're failing the real choice test here, which is what Stephanie Ruhle was trying to point out there, which is we know the danger that Donald Trump is. And I think where we see that reflected in the NBC poll, what fascinates me is the first question, are we going in the right direction or wrong direction? 65% of the country says we're going in the wrong direction. it's like 65 to 28 maybe. But the fascinating thing is within that poll, voters see Vice President Harris as the change agent, and she is. There's no faking this. Donald Trump, this is his third time as the major party nominee. We've seen him as president. He's not a change agent. Vice President Harris, this is her first time as a presidential nominee who's offering her view of the world. The American people see that as change, and they say that is the change we want, particularly compared with Donald Trump.
Eddie, how do you see the contest and the conversation about the contest?
Well, I thought that Stephanie was engaged in an interesting pedagogical moment with Brett, right? And the question was, okay, if it's the case that she doesn't hold these positions, are you going to vote for Donald Trump? Right? So part of what we see with Brett is that there's this kind of worry that Kamala Harris is going to turn out to be a liberal. Perhaps she is. But does it follow from that fact that you can't not vote for her because your identity is so constituted as a conservative that you're willing to hand over the country to someone like Donald Trump? And that's what she was trying to say to them. You can't make her into you. She's not her policies are not going to be aligned with Project 2025. Her projects are not going to be aligned with moderate Republicans or so. She is who she is, and we can begin to detail that over the course of her career. We can't morph her into something else, but the question for the coalition, the broad coalition, is that she is who she is, and Donald Trump is who he is. Where do you land?
I think the other thing is, for them, it's about them.
Of course. Exactly.
Because there is a voter, I think Mitch McConnell and Bill Barr are the same kind of, and I don't know, I mean, Brett's made clear he's not going to vote for Trump. So Brett Stevens, and I don't want to pick on Brett Stevens, but I do think he gave voice to this thing that's out there. If you care about things like judges or foreign policy, then you must care about the process that appoints judges and confirms them. You must care about the limits of presidential power and of the State Department. And the thing about Trump is that if you care about the things you think you care about, or you go on a TV show and say you care about, Brett was making clear that he wants to understand our positions in the Middle East. It's something he writes about regularly, and I trust that he cares about that deeply. I know he does. If you care about that, what you're saying is, I'm not going to vote for Trump, but I'm not going to help defeat the person who would literally be the political version of Russian roulette when it comes to the issues that I care about most.
Absolutely right. There's nothing that I probably agree with in terms of Liz Cheney, in terms of policy. Probably zero, negative zero in some ways. But she and I agree on the background conditions that allow us to disagree.
Correct.
That's the key.
That's the point.
That's the point. And it seems to me that those persons who are using policy as a proxy for something much deeper, right? There are some folks who believe that if they vote for a Democrat, somehow they've cut against the grain of who they take themselves to be.
Right.
Right. And so part of what we have to do is to unpack what policy is actually, what the demand for policy details is actually standing in.
Well, because, and this comes back to where Claire and I started, and where David, like, it's about making registered voters likely voters. It's about making likely voters Harris voters. It's about people who don't like Trump, but say they care about things deeply, to understand that if you care about things deeply, the only one that keeps us a functioning democracy is Harris. We have so much.
Friends, there are just over 6 weeks until Election Day. We are almost there. There's also new polling from NBC News, and it shows a tight but shifting race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Joining us now, NBC News national political correspondent, the man with the numbers, Steve Kornacki. Bring us up to speed.
All right, Katie. Yeah, well, the bottom line here, overall, our national poll here has Harris 49, Trump 44. And of course, this is a pretty significant departure. You know, this is our first poll, by the way, since Harris became the Democratic candidate, where we've tested her against Trump. All of our previous polling for the past year had been Trump versus Biden. And in that polling, Trump had led Biden in all but one case. That was a tie. So just shows you how much it's shifted just since Kamala Harris replaced Joe Biden as the Democratic candidate. Some things that are powering Harris's current standing. Number one is a gender gap, a very big gender gap. Look, among men in our poll, Trump leads. His margin is 12 points, 52 to 40%. Among women, Harris leads. Look at this, by 21 points, 58 to 37, 21 and 12. You're looking at a gender gap there of 33 points. If that is something we actually see materialize on Election Day, that would be like 10 points higher than what we had in 2020, 2016. Both of those were historically high gender gaps. This would be something else altogether if this is what happened. And again, it's that, especially that big margin with women that is powering Harris right now. Then you also take a look at this by race. And what stands out here is you look at black voters. Now, historically, this is a core Democratic constituency, and you do see Harris at 85%, Trump at 7%. These are numbers sort of historically you'd expect to see for a Democrat versus a Republican. But when Joe Biden had been the Democratic candidate, his numbers were lagging, historically speaking, among black voters. You'd see him sometimes in the polls, somewhere in the 60s among black voters. Trump, for that matter, and there still are some polls out there that show this, Trump, had been running in the teens, maybe even the high teens among black voters. Again, that's not a huge number, it sounds like, but that would actually be very, very high for a Republican compared to the past. So the fact that in our poll, Harris has, sort of reestablished traditional Democratic levels with black voters, that's very significant. That's something Democrats were worried about under Joe Biden. You see, too, Harris, an improvement in her image. The basic question of do you have a positive or negative view of a candidate? We polled this just before she got in the race. We asked folks their opinion of her. It was 32% positive then. It is now 48% positive. You see she's slightly above water, a little bit higher positive than negative. And again, compare this to Joe Biden. This is the candidate Democrats had until the end of July. He's sitting underwater, 41-49, pretty much in the same range where Donald Trump is. So that's a key difference right there. Then finally, there is this, though. There's a lot of good news in this poll for Democrats, but if you're a Republican, you could take heart in this. Look at these issues, asking which candidate is better when it comes to securing the border and controlling immigration. When it comes to dealing with the economy, Trump by 21 points on the border and immigration, Trump by 9 on the economy. In our poll, we asked, what's the most important issue to you? The economy and inflation. You add them together, 40% of voters say that's their number one issue. You fold in immigration and the border, a majority of voters are citing something in that area as their top issue. And Trump does have right now in our poll the issue advantage there. So certainly that keeps him in the game.
Steve, I was looking at that gender gap that you just mentioned, 33 points, and that is such a striking number. As you underscored, it's higher than 2020 and 2016, if it holds. We've also seen some new polling out of the New York Times that shows Donald Trump is doing better in some battleground states, specifically in the Sun Belt. If there is a gender gap that remains at 33 points, how does Donald Trump overcome that? Is that just a national thing? Or if you're seeing numbers like that, does that mean Harris might actually, if it remains, be doing better in some of these battleground places? Makes sense of the contradictions between the NBC News stuff and the New York Times stuff for me.
Well, a couple of ways of looking at it. And I'm just going back trying to go back in the screens here to call this up. And for some reason, here we go. Taking a look again at that gender gap. Well, look, the answer on the gender gap from Trump's standpoint is gender gaps can work both ways. You see right now, this is netting out in Harris's benefit because her margin on the side of the gender gap where she's doing well, women, is bigger than Trump's margin on the side where he's doing well, men. But if Trump drives up his support with men, he could neutralize a lot of this. Or for that matter, if he were just to make a little bit in the way of headway here with women, he could erase it on that end, too. So there's possibilities for Trump in terms of attacking the gender gap that way. When you look at Trump in these new New York Times Siena polls you're talking about, doing a little bit better, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina. You compare those to the northern tier of battleground states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, certainly. Those states tend to be whiter demographically than the states in the Sun Belt. Now, we're showing you that Harris in our poll has made improvement here among black voters, but this number here among Hispanic voters, a 19-point edge for Harris, that's basically where our poll had it when Joe Biden was still the Democratic candidate. And that historically is a low number there for Democrats. That would mark further improvement for Donald Trump from the strides he already made in 2020. And again, you look at a state like Georgia, population there, 10% Latino. There's possibility, Arizona certainly, that can help Trump make strides in those states he may not be making in some of those northern states. And then the other big thing when you ask about reconciling different polls, and it's something I think just to keep in mind in general with any poll that comes out between now and Election Day, they are going to bounce around a little bit depending on the pollster. Sometimes there's going to be statistical noise, margin of error enters into these things. And so always, you have these poll averages. We maintain these poll averages and show you those too. And the poll averages can help you too. Just put in context any one individual poll that you're seeing.
Just the difficulty in finding reliable, likely voters. Steve Kornacki, thank you very much, as always. And joining us now, NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster, who is in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. What is Sturgeon Bay telling us, Shaq?
Well, Katie, let me tell you, this first is a county that has sided with the winner of every presidential election going back to 1996. So a lot of swing voters here, a lot of moderate voters here, and people who are telling me that they're still trying to make that ultimate decision. And, one nugget that has been reflected very clearly in my conversations here is what you heard Steve describing in terms of Vice President Harris's rise in favorability. Listen to some of those conversations. How has your opinion of Kamala Harris changed?
Mine has changed favorably because I was very negative about it. I just think she was like a nobody, didn't even know who she was. And she's done a reasonably good job of marketing.
I am surprised at how strong she is. I honestly kind of didn't know she was there for a few years because I didn't feel like she did a whole lot. I'd much rather have her than to be frightened of having Trump in the office for another 4 years.
I like her positive attitude that we're going to go forward. We're not going to go backwards.
I definitely have come to the conclusion that she's capable. I mean, and she's proved that in the debate, and she's proved that since then.
Katie, that last couple that you saw, they say they are traditionally Republican voters. He said his father would be rolling over in his grave if he even knew he was considering voting for a Democrat in this election. And one point that I heard from the Harris campaign when they saw we were here in this county, they say since Harris moved to the top of the ticket, they've gotten 300 new volunteer signups in this county alone. While that doesn't sound like a huge number, that's about 1% of the population here.
Oh, that's a big deal. Shaq Brewster. Shaq, thank you very much.